Hey, been a long time since I did a video. Um, Given everything's going on, figured I'd put one out there. Hope everybody's doing well. Um, this weird lockdown thing, and obviously the disturbances around the country. Start out by saying, look, what happened to George Floyd is outrageous and appalling. Um, Anybody who doesn't think that isn't worth your time. I think we've all agreed that was egregious and terrible. And the individuals responsible should be dealt with according to the system. Now, our responses to that, our grief, even our anger, are legitimate. Okay, and again, this is my take for what it's worth. Those of you who know me know, I love you. I love everybody. I want peace. I want people to do well by one another and live well. So here's the thing, it's the quote at the opening suggests. Life is suffering. If you're older, you know this already, if you've been through enough. Younger people may not know it as much, particularly younger people who've lived in pretty decent circumstances. That's good. As parents, you want to protect your children from certain hardships insofar as you can. And there are people who've been through a lot of suffering at a young age. Certainly, I don't want to suppose for one second that I know what it's like to be an African-American young man in this society. I can only try to imagine it. And our imagination is the key to us being able to have empathy and sympathetic love. And we have to have faith in one another's ability to imagine that. No, I can't be you, but I spend a lot of time fostering my imagination. And we all should, because it's that enables us, as Percy Shelley, the poet, argues. It enables us to love. That's our capacity to get outside of ourselves. Which leads me to the point of this short video. I'll do a number of videos, I hope, on different elements of this thing, because the extremes will try to pit us against one another, regardless of our race, because there's a power play at work, okay? And so we have to pay attention to what we should be paying attention to, yeah? Which is the stuff around us, what I can do. So here's the deal, life is suffering, and there's nothing anyone can do about that. Life's gonna be suffering because people die, right? Life ends. Everything we have in life, we value it because it goes away. And, without getting into deep theological speculation about that, it's the nature of our existence that we value things based on its difference. So we value presence because there will be absence later, yeah? So that's why life is suffering, and it's going to be suffering because things don't last. Pony boy, right? Nothing gold can ever stay. Outsiders. But so life is suffering, and there's going to be suffering. So the question I ask myself, and that I would encourage us all to ask ourselves, is, okay, how do I respond to suffering? Do I inflict more suffering, or do I seek to alleviate suffering? Those of us with Christian faith know that the promise is we should be willing to take on suffering onto ourselves in order to diminish suffering for others as much as we can, because we can't stop it. As a parent, you understand this, right? You try to take on yourself suffering so that your children won't have to. But there are sufferings from which you cannot protect them. So your job is to simply do what you can to alleviate the suffering. So, again, in the event of a divorce, if you lash out because you're angry, you're inflicting suffering, you're making suffering worse. Instead of trying to take on suffering, contain and deal with that pain in order to alleviate the suffering that your children are already going to be having to deal with, right? So if I go protest, okay, I'm seeking to alleviate suffering, right? Because you're saying I want this system fixed, I want these problems resolved. But if I go and decide that in the interest of trying to solve that suffering, I'm going to destroy a business or throw a brick or attack someone, well, now I'm inflicting suffering in a world that's already full of suffering. And so that's where I would urge us to remember our job is to not contribute to suffering, regardless, to anyone. regardless of race, color, creed, because guess what? Every individual will suffer in this life because we love things, and we will lose those things that we love. And so, again, without getting into the question of statistics and race and all of those things, I'm always interested in, my students all know this, I'm always interested in you as an individual, not as a group. I love that these parts of your culture are part of who you are, that's fine. But I love you, and I'm interested in you as you, okay, as an individual, and your responsibility, and how can I help to alleviate your suffering? That's all my teaching is. How do I teach students, and I stress all the time, there will be suffering. The only question is, how will you respond when it happens? Will you alleviate suffering, or will you increase the suffering in the world? And that's all any of us can do is, okay, I'm going to take on more suffering on myself, and I'm not going to let my suffering cause me to inflict more suffering. Anger, as Andrew Klavan likes to say, is the devil's cocaine. I know when I'm mad, it's not a good time for me to respond. I know when I'm deeply saddened, it's not a good time for me to respond because I'm not thinking clearly. And I'm hurt and wounded, yeah? The way you are, like initially when you burn your hand and you curse and you're angry about it, and you're like, damn it, right? Well, I do. But, right, it's a normal thing because you're mad. And it's just an instant response, and the pain goes away, and then you're not as angry, right? Deeper wounds wound more deeply. And there's a period of anger, and it's not a clear period. And so it's one that, again, if your response is to create more suffering, you're not helping. We're not helping if our response, I shouldn't be preachy because I have the same capacity for that anyone does. So, again, it's more important, as I've said many times, to do right than to be right. We cannot get divided, okay, in this sense of some kind of moral superiority and feeling like we're better than other people. Because you're going to suffer too. We're all going to suffer. And our calling in a civilized society is to find a way to diffuse that suffering insofar as we can. But there's going to be bad individuals. There's going to be people who let their suffering cause them to create the suffering of others. Clearly, the police officer who did that to George Floyd was inflicting suffering and was wrong for that. The response cannot be to cause more suffering. I just want now to remind us all that our job is to alleviate suffering wherever we can, not to further it. And to remember that human life is everywhere a situation in which little is to be enjoyed and much is to be endured. Unless that depress you, which it certainly can in Johnson's context, remember how beautiful the good things are. The smile of a child, the perfect song, you know, the moments that we have, the sunrise or a sunset, okay? Those things are beautiful. And as Keats points out in the Ode on Melancholy, right? You don't get, and C.S. Lewis, right? The pain now is part of the happiness then. So the suffering's going to come. The question is, am I making suffering worse, or am I seeking to alleviate it by taking more onto myself if I have to? Dr. King certainly taught us that, and it's of course the very lesson of Christianity. So, keep hope. Don't be divided. Remember that we're a good people. We all are at heart. Not by nature. By nature, we get scared and selfish, and that's normal. And people will use that fear to exploit us. So it's incumbent upon us as individuals, not as groups, but as each individual, when you get up in the morning to go, am I going to alleviate suffering today? Or am I going to contribute to it? And some days I'll screw up and I'll contribute to it. And then I have to deal with that. Ask God for forgiveness and ask the people that I've hurt. Not the people that someone else hurt a long time ago. I'm not responsible for that. It's enough to carry my own brokenness and my own contributions to suffering. That's enough of a burden for any of us. So, simple but not easy, as I say all the time. I hope everybody's doing well. And again, like, share, subscribe if you want to hear more. And yeah, keep the faith. All right? Remember, it's far more important to do right than it is to be right. Peace.